Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Professor Jeffrey Rosenfeld, and I have the privilege of being the chair of CLINUVEL Pharmaceuticals Limited. As chair of today's meeting, it is my pleasure to welcome you to CLINUVEL's 2025 AGM. I note that we have complied with the relevant requirements for convening this meeting and that a quorum is present. As the time is now 10 a.m. in Melbourne, just after, I formally declare the meeting open. Before the formal business of the meeting, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of Australia. I also draw your attention to our legal notice, which highlights that there are risks which can impact the plans and initiatives we will be discussing today. I'm joined today by my fellow non-executive directors. 3 non-executive directors are here in person: Mrs. Susan Smith, Mr. Matthew Pringle, Mr. Guy Vandivert, Dr. Pearl Grimes, and Dr. Karen Aggersborg join us online from the United States of America. I would also like to welcome our Managing Director and CEO, Dr. Philippe Wolgen, our Chief Operating Officer, Mr. Lachlan Hay, who's on the screen, in Singapore, our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Peter Vaughan, he's at the back there, our Head of Investor Relations, Mr. Malcolm Bull, and our Company Secretary, Miss Claire Newstead Sinclair, at the end there. The company's auditors, Grant Thornton, are represented here today by partner Mr. Brock McKenzie. The auditors will be available to answer questions during item 1 on the agenda or at the end of the presentations regarding the conduct of the audit and the audit report for the year ended 30th of June 2025. I would also like to welcome our Corporate Counsel, Arnold Bloch-Lieber, who kindly offered to host the meeting today in their offices. I'd like to specifically acknowledge Mr. Jeremy Liebler in the front row there. Finally, I would like to welcome representatives from our share registry, Computershare, who are present today, and I welcome all of you, shareholders and interested parties as well. The notice of meeting has been given in accordance with the company's constitution, and copies are available for you on the company's website, the ASX announcements platform, and at the share registry's registration desk. I will take the notice of meeting and explanatory statement as read. The format of the meeting will be a brief chair address from myself, a formal consideration of the business on today's agenda with an opportunity to ask questions on the formal business, completion of the poll on the formal items of business, and close of the formal part of today's meeting. Then there will be the Managing Director's update, and then there will be general questions from the floor. Shareholders will be able to ask questions and cast votes at the appropriate times while the meeting is in progress. So before we commence with the formal part of the meeting, I would now like to provide my opening chair's address. To open, this session is being recorded and will be made publicly available on CLINUVEL's website, ensuring full transparency and equal access to information for all shareholders. Our successful financial position has been well covered recently and will be further presented at this AGM. Today, I will give you the board's perspective on how our strategic planning translates directly into your financial returns. Our CEO will address the future following the formal business, and I will address the foundation upon which it has been built. In the pharmaceutical industry, intent is cheap. Execution is everything. This brings me to a concept we treat as a core financial metric: longevity. It is not merely a measure of time, but a quantifiable competitive advantage, a disciplined, capital-efficient execution of a long-term plan against relentless headwinds. You should not underestimate its value. Allow me to crystallize this with 3 financial case studies briefly. Case study 1, the EMA, that's the European Medical Regulatory Authority approval, is a lesson in strategic capital allocation. In biopharma, regulatory bodies hold ultimate veto power. For 3 consecutive years, and despite robust evidence, the European Medicines Agency rejected our data for expanding the use of SCENESSE and aligning it with the US FDA-approved label. The board faced a clear capital allocation decision: continue dedicating 7-figure resources to this pursuit, or cut our losses and deploy that capital elsewhere. The opportunity cost was significant. We analysed the risk. Our team's conviction, backed by irrefutable data versus the irrationality of the initial regulatory stance. We committed to our data and our team, and that commitment paid off. Last month, the EMA approved the expanded label and admitted errors and misjudgment in its assessment. The result? An expanded revenue stream secured for the European business. This is not a story of perseverance. It is a case study in a board making a disciplined, high-conviction investment in the face of uncertainty and winning. Case study 2, the Singapore venture and owning the technology. 4 years ago, our internal R&D on sustained release formulations showed unconvincing data. We had a choice: shut down internal development and outsource this activity at a premium, surrendering future IP, or continue funding our own laboratories. External advisors rightly noted the low probability of success, but our CSO and CEO argued that success, however slim, would create an unassailable position. We, the board, backed them. The result? In January 2025, we saw that our faith and patience were being rewarded. We learned about breakthrough data emerging, leading to the bold decision to advance new liquid injectables formulations to the preclinical stage, the final step before manufacturing for human trials. We now own the foundational IP for next-generation liquid injectables. We own the asset outright. This disciplined internal capital allocation over a decade has created optionality and value that outsourcing never could. Case study 3, financial discipline, the dividend versus growth calculus. We operate a singular model in biotech: profitable, dividend-paying, and fully self-funded. This is a deliberate capital strategy, not coincidence or luck. We made a conscious decision to reinvest $175 million over 5 years into our pipeline: vitiligo, porphyrias, ACTH, and new formulations. The market was informed. The discipline was absolute. We came in 3.1% under budget whilst advancing all programs over a 5-year period, financial year 21 to 25, 3.1% under budget. The financial logic is simple. We chose to conserve profits, avoid capital raises, forego a marginal increase in dividend payments, and place share buybacks on hold. This is all in order to fund R&D that we believe will generate significant returns. We are building high-value assets inside a profitable company without diluting you, the shareholder. This financial stewardship is your structural advantage. I'd now like to present a retrospective on execution. At last year's AGM, I committed to exploring acquisitions. From the 10 viable ideas our teams generate or receive annually, we commit to deeper diligence in a number of these. Our teams made 2 disciplined, non-binding offers for North American assets. Both were abandoned as we could not guarantee the levels of return that we seek from such opportunities. We walk away from deals that do not meet our strict risk-adjusted return criteria. Instead, we redeploy that capital into our own higher conviction pipeline. This is capital restraint in action. However, we continue to pursue further options for business acquisition in North America, particularly, that would add value and pose low risk to our existing business. Furthermore, we have stress tested our operational resilience. At the time the CEO recovered from illness, our team delivered a 9th consecutive year of growth and profitability. On photocosmetics, we often get asked about this. As I reported in my recent chairman's letter, we continue to refine our photocosmetic formulations, which is a complex undertaking, I might say, in our Singapore laboratories. The timelines to regulatory approval and marketing will be presented by Dr. Wolgen. The board's view is that photocosmetics may well become an important revenue stream for CLINUVEL, and the photocosmetics should be pursued with prudence, but also with vigor. The road ahead. We are building a diversified portfolio of melanocortin-based assets designed to withstand the test of time and market cycles, developing a suite of drugs and photocosmetics based on platform technologies. Looking after both patients and those who desire advanced skin care through the photocosmetics is the driving force for the company. Providing long-term care and constructing close relationships with physicians and their patients is an integral part of our culture. So is our commitment to add value for our shareholders. The board carefully considers the chances of product development for the future, where highest needs exist. We shut down development programs when we lose the conviction of commercial reality and end up with cash to be used for projects where returns are expected. The pipeline is being de-risked. Finances are secure and talent is retained. Are there further dangers left? Absolutely. But any sophisticated investor who has done their diligence understands that our premium valuation is not for hope. It is for a proven, executable plan and a team that delivers on its capital commitments. I stated when I became chair that major changes would be made under my guidance, and we have made them. We attracted 3 new directors, and we have a board challenging each other on major issues and taking well-analysed and considered decisions, unafraid to speak their mind on critical topics to drive the company forward. I spoke last year about the development of the business and the value created against a flat share price. Under threat of tariffs, major challenges in pharma, investors' fear of competition, we have delivered another year with significant progress on SCENESSE, ACTH, new formulations, and vitiligo trials, over recruitment of the trial, to name a few. More important to you, we retained talent and added new staff. We also presented ourselves in a memorable way to an American audience at the American Academy of Dermatology meeting in Orlando in March 2025. We will do so again in Denver in March 26. In this address, I've given you many reasons to continue to support the board, me as chair, and the management team. Can it all go wrong as we diversify the pipeline? Of course it can. There are no certainties in our sector, but anyone who has done thorough research has silently assigned a percentage of value to our team executing their lifetime investment. Lastly, some of you have asked me about the status of succession planning for our CEO, and I intend to share more with you about that in the new year. I hope you perceive the same positive direction the company has been taking as I do. CLINUVEL is on track to deliver, perhaps taking longer than some would like, but we are certainly navigating the path and overcoming substantial challenges. I have no doubt that a bright future lies ahead for CLINUVEL, perhaps brighter than you can imagine. Thank you. And now to the business of the meeting, to the formal business. There are 4 items of business today, 3 of which require a formal resolution. This includes 1 non-binding ordinary resolution and 2 binding ordinary resolutions. In order to ascertain the true intention of shareholders and to reflect our focus on transparent governance, in accordance with the company's constitution, as chair, I have determined to call a poll on all resolutions to be considered at today's meeting. The voting procedure is as follows. All valid proxies received have been recorded, and the votes for each resolution will be displayed on screen behind me, and as such, I won't read out the numbers as we deal with each resolution. As advised in the notice of meeting, where proxies have been properly nominated to be at the chair's discretion, these proxy votes will be cast in favour of resolution 1 to 3. With regard to voting on resolutions, all shareholders, proxy holders, and authorised corporate representatives who are entitled to vote should have been issued with a blue voting cards, as you can see on the screens. A voting card also entitles you to comment and ask questions in this meeting. If anyone present is entitled to vote and does not have a voting card, please see one of the Computershare staff at the registration table at the entrance door. They will assist you. Non-voting shareholders were issued with a yellow shareholder attendance admission card upon entering. As you can see on the screens, a shareholder attendance card will not allow you to vote. However, you may still comment and ask questions. White cards are visitor cards and indicate a visitor. Visitors and media are reminded that whilst we welcome you at this meeting, it is a shareholder meeting and you may not make comments or ask questions. If I call on you, please raise your voting or non-voting attendance card prior to speaking to identify yourself as a shareholder. If you are acting as a proxy, please state clearly who you are appointed to represent when introducing yourself to the meeting. We will provide the opportunity at the end of the formal items of business for shareholders to ask questions. Voting on all resolutions is allowed up until the time the poll is closed. A representative from our share registry, Mr. Peter Render of Computershare, will now provide details on the poll process. Peter?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We'll now go through the process for the poll. We'll be conducting a poll on resolutions 1 through 3. On the reverse of your voting card are the 3 items of business. Please mark the box next to each item to define how you wish to cast your vote. I'll be bringing around a poll box. Please ensure you lodge your card in the poll box to make your votes counted. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. When Computershare tallied the poll results, we will announce the results following the conclusion of today's meeting on the ASX Market Announcements platform. With regard to proxies, we have engaged the services of our share registry to compile and report on the proxy voting. Computershare has provided its formal report disclosing the proxy votes received. Before opening the poll, I wish to remind shareholders that the poll will remain open for an additional minute after we have considered all resolutions. If you have any questions on the formal part of today's agenda, please follow the questions process as previously advised. I now declare the poll open. I will move to the items of business to be considered today. Item 1. The first item of financial statements and reports of directors and auditors. The first item is to receive and consider the financial statements and reports of the directors and auditors for the financial year ended 30th of June 25. These items are contained in the annual report, so I will ask that they be taken as read. The annual report is available on the ASX announcement platform or on the company's website. The Corporations Act requires the accounts and reports to be laid before shareholders at the annual general meeting. However, except as set out in Resolution 1 to be considered later, there is no requirement for a vote of members to be taken on them. No written questions to the auditor were received by the cut-off date 5 business days before this meeting. The questions may be directed through myself to the auditor in relation to the conduct of the audit report, the company's accounting policies, or the independence of the auditor. Does any shareholder have any questions or comments on the financial statements and reports? There being no questions, we will proceed with the agenda. We will move to the formal resolutions that need to be considered. Proxies received in relation to the formal resolutions will be set out in the slides displayed on the screen behind me. Item 2 is Resolution 1, which is the adoption of the remuneration report, forming part of the Directors' Report for the financial year ended 30th of June 2025. The vote on this resolution is advisory only and does not bind the directors or the company. I now invite Mrs. Susan Smith, Chair of the Remuneration Committee, to say a few words and chair the meeting for Resolution 1 and 2. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you, Jeffrey. And good morning, shareholders. I have seen the proxy votes lodged, which are shown on the screen. Voting will shortly be finalised, and the record will show the will of this meeting. My purpose today is not to change that record, but to ensure its implications are understood with absolute clarity. I also seek to lend perspective to the thinking of an international board of an Australian-listed entity, an entity which generates all of its revenues and employs most of its teams outside of this country, and my own views as a former CEO of large, complex healthcare organisations. From this latter vantage point, I have lived what an organisation expects of their executive leadership and see how this needs to be considered by all stakeholders. The remuneration report is not an invoice. It is a strategic blueprint. It is the mechanism by which this board secures and retains the leadership required to navigate a sector where failure is the norm and success is the exception. As board members, we are privy to complex and often critical existential decisions taken by the CEO and his team. Those decisions which have taken the right turn for us shareholders, and those decisions which have prevented us from facing the wrong turns. At the end of fiscal year 25, the result of those decisions is a company which is performing very well in a challenging environment of price cutting of pharmaceutical drugs, restrictions by healthcare insurers, and competitors running scaremongering campaigns on CLINUVEL and CLINUVEL. The committee pays for good decisions and the avoidance of really bad ones, as well as the risks anticipated and communicated to us as a board. To those who voted against the remuneration report, you have registered a protest. But let us be precise about what you have protested against. You have voted against a structure where the majority of the CEO's compensation is contingent on delivering the long-term value you demand. You have voted against a structure which needs to be competitive on a global level to retain the current leadership, while sufficient to attract new talent to steer CLINUVEL in the future. The business requires us to think and operate globally and structure our approach accordingly. You have voted against the principle of paying for proven, multifaceted performance, not just profitability, but the cultivation of talent, the stewardship of a robust pipeline, and the strategic foresight that has consistently shielded this company from existential risk. Let me just explain the committee's perspective on pay for performance. Performance is running a viable enterprise in each of the past 20 years, meeting the criterion of appointed auditors. Performance, as in investing and training people, retaining them, and building the next generation of leaders. Performance, as in making sure that the highest likelihood of success comes out of research and development pipelines. Performance, as in anticipating policy, legal, and regulatory changes. Most of all, performance is being responsible for complex decisions that could easily have failed, leading to disastrous outcomes. In simpler words, the company pays for the assessment and management of risk by its CEO. You have voted against the market reality because to attract and retain the caliber of leadership capable of building one of only 2 profitable melanocortin companies on the planet requires investment. The alternative is not a saving, it is a discount on mediocrity. Most critically, you have voted against stability in an industry defined by volatility. The median biotech CEO tenure is 4.7 years, a timeline synonymous with abandoned strategies and vaporized value. Philippe's 20-year tenure is not a cost. It is your single greatest insurance policy against the cycle of decline that has consumed our peers. Look at the landscape. According to BioShares research, 57% of Australian-listed life science companies are now seeking funding as they have less than 1 year of cash reserves left. Global firms are seeking to offload assets or staff to stay afloat as they failed to execute on clinical or commercial objectives. We are not among them. We are profitable, dividend-paying, and in control of our destiny. This is not an accident. It is the direct result of the leadership you have chosen to challenge. All shareholders have benefited from this leadership. The conclusion this board has reached, based on data, analysis, and the stark evidence of competitors who faltered, is undeniable. The preservation of shareholder wealth is the direct byproduct of executive stability and quality. Let me reiterate our 6 collective objectives for a CEO. Number 1, establish and maintain a going concern. 2, strive for long-termism in executive decisions. 3, lay the foundation for a pharmaceutical group able to execute all research, development, and innovation in-house. 4, adhere to prudent risk management of research and development and clinical programs. 5, commercialize products and services which provide meaningful benefit. And 6, establish a company which owns all or most parts of the supply and value chain. Having executed as a CEO myself for nearly 3 decades, coached CEOs in large and small firms across a breadth of industries, and as chair of CLINUVEL's Remuneration Committee, I adopt the following in determining value of an executive and CEO. There is no one size fits all in pharmaceuticals. A CEO and their team are essential, particularly in innovative R&D companies. Stability of company and progress are inherently connected to each other. Not anticipating future changes in environments is often catastrophic in life sciences. One may hold different views on a remuneration package, but shareholders at a distance underestimate the impact of leadership. Your vote against the remuneration report has the potential to undermine the leadership of CLINUVEL. History shows that companies whose leadership is undermined ultimately pay a far higher price than any remuneration package. They pay in lost opportunity, in eroded value, and in the long, difficult climb back to credibility. The board is confident in its judgment to endorse a framework that pays for the performance that secures your future. The record will show your vote. The future will show the wisdom of the board's approach to remuneration and ensuring continuity under the right leadership. Thank you. I now draw your attention to the proxies received prior to the meeting as displayed on the screen behind me. I now move that shareholders consider, and if thought fit, pass the ordinary resolution. I now move to Resolution 2. Item 3. We are going to take questions at the end, sir. No, before. After I've gone through the resolutions. Resolution 2 is re-election of Director Professor Jeffrey Rosenfeld. The next item of business related to the re-election of Professor Jeffrey Rosenfeld as a director of the company. I confirm that all directors other than Professor Rosenfeld recommend that shareholders vote in favour of his re-election. I invite Jeffrey to come forward and speak to his background and election.
Thanks, Susan. I joined the board of CLINUVEL in 2019. I was elected chair at the end of 2023, and so I've been in place as chair since then. I sit on the Remuneration Committee, the Audit and Risk Committee, and I am chair of the Nominations Committee. I am strongly committed to CLINUVEL and its success. I have the expertise and experience to be chair of a public company board and a global pharmaceutical company. I have had over 30 years' experience in leadership in the health and university sectors and in the Australian Defence Force, attaining the rank of Major General and Surgeon General of Australia. I have deep experience in organisational governance, culture, ethical behaviour and practice, and in strategic decision-making. I have a deep understanding of the business, of our business, and medical science that CLINUVEL is engaged in. I have been an investigator on some very large international clinical trials in the health sector for many years. CLINUVEL is now in a transition phase. I'm engaged in succession planning and the further development of our pharmaceutical products, pivotal clinical trials, and our photocosmetic development. It is therefore important to maintain continuity at board level and for me to remain chair. Lastly, I am determined to get the best outcome for you, our shareholders, even if it takes longer than you would like. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey. I move that Professor Jeffrey Rosenfeld be re-elected as a director on the basis set out in the notice of annual general meeting. I refer you to the proxies received prior to the meeting as displayed on the screen. I now move that shareholders consider and, if thought fit, pass the ordinary resolution. I now pass back to Geoffrey, who will move to Resolution 3.
Thank you, Sue. The re-election of Director Mr. Matthew Pringle as a Director of the company. I confirm that all directors other than Mr. Pringle recommend that shareholders vote in favour of his election. I invite Matthew to come forward and speak to his background and election.
Oh, thanks very much, Geoffrey, and good morning, everybody. And thanks for the opportunity to speak in support of my re-election. Over the last 40 years, I've had the privilege of working across a range of industries, guiding organisations through growth, regulatory change and strategic opportunities. My experience includes leading IPOs, managing capital raisings and M&A transactions, driving governance reform, and overseeing financial reporting, risk and capital management. These are skills I've brought directly to my various roles as Chair of Audit and Risk Committees and as a non-executive director, including here at CLINUVEL. CLINUVEL truly is a remarkable business, one that combines scientific ambition with disciplined financial management. I've been particularly impressed by the company's balanced approach, maintaining strong cash reserves, funding growth from its own resources and delivering consistent fully franked dividends. These are qualities that set CLINUVEL apart in the biotech sector. If re-elected, my focus will remain on ambitious growth with disciplined financial and fiscal management and long-term value creation for all shareholders. I remain deeply committed to this company and really believe we have a very positive future. Thank you for your consideration and support.
Thanks very much, Matthew. I move that Mr. Matthew Pringle be re-elected as Director on the basis set out in the Notice of Annual General Meeting. I refer you to the proxies received prior to the meeting as displayed on the screen. I now move that shareholders consider and, if thought fit, pass the ordinary resolution. Do any shareholders have any questions or comments in relation to the resolutions today? If yes, please raise your hand, and if I call on you, raise your voting or non-voting attendance card prior to speaking to identify yourself as a shareholder. Please state your name and the number of shares that you hold. If you are acting as a proxy, please state clearly who you are appointed to represent when introducing yourself to the meeting and the number of shares that you are representing. Please proceed. Now, I proceed now to take questions and if you wish. Are there any questions on the resolutions? There will be time for open questioning at the end as well. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Harry Cato. Number of shares I've got, I can't remember exactly, but you'll have to forgive me on that one. But I have roughly 15,000.
Okay.
Held across various entities. Question I've got, in the resolutions, there's only 50 million odd shares on issue. And it strikes me, are you able to tell us how many people are voting against? Not who they are, but what is the number?
Malcolm, would you like to?
And the reason why I asked
did you hear that question?
I'm not trying to be devious here. It's just a question. Is it one block of some institution that's got themselves in a twist? Or is it multiple shareholders? It strikes me, given that you only have 50 million shares on issue, that it's a couple of big instos who are sitting on the fence, as it were, causing trouble.
Malcolm?
No, the number of voters, including registered voters and beneficial holders, is well over 400 out of over 7,000 registered shareholders, which doesn't include beneficial holders. So there's a range of votes for and against from institutions, family offices, high net worth individuals and people, other people.
So are you able to say what is their objection? Because if we go to the is it item number, whatever the remuneration report is, where there's a 63% of the votes already passed, is that right? So what's their primary problem?
With the remuneration resolution?
I'm not trying to be devious here.
No.
I'm actually just I'm a huge supporter, by the way. So
I think the problem is that some shareholders and proxy advisors believe that the CEO's remuneration is beyond what it ought to be in the Australian context. And note, I say the Australian context because that's the problem. We're dealing with here a global company with a global CEO. Most of our business is in US and Europe. It's not here. Most of our staff are overseas. Our CEO is working mostly from overseas. Yes, we have an office in Melbourne. Yes, we're listed on the ASX, but our main business is elsewhere. We are a global entity, and we need to attract a high functioning, high performing CEO in the marketplace. We can't do that if we obey the particularly proxy advisors who are saying we should have judge our CEO's salary or remuneration based on Australian company standards. And we've done our analysis on Australian companies, and like overseas companies, particularly in the US, we know what the going rate is, and it's not the Australian rate. If we had the Australian rate, we would be doing exactly what Susan said and lowering ourselves to mediocrity, and the company would be in a worse position than what we are now with a successful, well-performing company. And Philippe, being our CEO, we believe as a board, rightly deserves the salary that he's receiving.
Hear, hear.
Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I don't know if I get this order right. Chris Williams, bought and paid for more shares than are sitting in front of me. My question is on the remuneration report, and I thank you for the lecture. I'd already voted.
It's not a lecture, it's answering the previous question.
Not yours. The lecture that we got in relation to the defensive part of, I've got the vote, which is against me on the resolution. I've already voted. If I had to vote again, I wouldn't be changing the vote. My question is, and I have to put my glasses on, you're currently accruing money in relation to a retention payment, which is to, and quote, facilitate and complete the company's strategic transition to a diversified biopharma, which has an end date of 30th of June 2026, 9 months or so. Does the accrual still stand, and are you accruing? And if so, what are the conditions that is needed to be satisfied? And I welcome that Philippe is here and in good health, and that he gets to whatever the end dates are. But there must be something that has to be achieved in that time, specifically, which is mentioned also.
Beg your pardon. The plan is still in place, and therefore the accruals will still be made.
It's to achieve something, not a plan. Not a plan.
Right, you've asked your question. Now we let Susan answer the question. Thank you.
The requirement that is required, what we require is that the strategic plan is furthered and completed, and that all of the items that are on the table at the moment that we've asked the MD to execute with his team, they all need to be completed. And that is what we are requiring. We also require that he actually remains in service till the end of June 26. That is obviously critical from what I'm saying. And I would just add, I wasn't giving a lecture. I was actually trying to explain to shareholders that the remuneration committee really, really considers what is the best outcome for this company. And we believe that that is to retain the fine leadership that we have enjoyed for the past 20 years, and that it is critical that we continue to do that. So it wasn't a lecture, but it really was in response to people asking, well, what is it that the remuneration committee does? I have told you today what the remuneration committee does. Thank you.
Right. Are there any other questions? Thank you, Susan. Yes, sir. Can you pass the microphone, please, Caroline?
Hi, Budi Salim. Not sure that is the right question. This is my first
You're going
time
to tell
to
us
come
how
to
many shares
AGM.
you hold before you ask the question?
10 to 15,000.
Okay.
Yep. Just, if it is not the right context, please bear with me. I'm just trying to understand the vision from the management for the next 1 to 3 years, and trying to understand maybe just the top risk and opportunities that
Okay.
the company sees.
Good question. And that's exactly what our CEO is going to address for you shortly. So I won't preempt what he's going to say, but he'll cover vision and our objectives for the company over the next few years. Yes. Are there any other questions? As I say, there will be open questions from the floor later on. Yes, sir.
Me again. 25,000 in case you're asking.
Thank you.
Mine is to Mr. Pringle, seeking re-election. You've been on the board now for 18 months? Yes. Yeah. So you've had a good chance to see what the company has, the intellectual property it has. Have you come to a conclusion that photocosmetics are feasible, exist, and can be launched in the timeframes that the company has been announcing?
Well, I'd have to say photocosmetics feasibility isn't my area of expertise, but mine's more one of financial. I was in Singapore with the board earlier this year getting a presentation from the team on the photocosmetics, and to be honest, some elements the board was very happy with and some not, as you would expect in a normal organisation. And Philippe might go into this a bit more in his presentation in terms of the direction we're heading in photocosmetics. So I focus more on not so much the technical aspects, but the financial, as you'd appreciate from my background in terms of their marketability and their commerciality and whether we're going to make a profit out of them. And at the moment, the product line, in my view, I mean, cosmetics is a tough sector, but assuming the products meet our expectations, I think the future looks pretty good for them and for the company. But it's pretty hard to go into much more detail than that. I'm sorry.
I think you'll hear more detail on this from our CEO report shortly. Are there any other questions? We probably should move on. We've got a fair bit to cover. There will be an opportunity to ask further questions later, but if there are no further questions or comments, that concludes the formal resolutions to be considered. If you require further time to complete the poll, please indicate by raising your hand. I'm just pausing while the voting is concluded. The blue. Just got one over there. Thanks. Thank you. I now declare the poll closed. Now on to other business. As the company has not received notice of any other business, I will now move to close the formal part of the meeting. Excuse me. I now hand over to Dr. Wolgen to provide his Managing Director's address. I might just say that Philippe's a bit under the weather with a virus, so please bear that in mind. Philippe?
First of all, I need to acknowledge our auditors and our new partner, ABL, for hosting it, BioShares for following its 20 years. We are going to do this slightly different today. This is my 20th AGM. And I'm not going to provide you glossy slides or financial projections. I'm going to tell you the story how it is in 4 chapters. And we'll talk about the value of time in science and how that relates to CLINUVEL. As MD, I see it as my primary task to figure out the durability of a business concept, but also to build moats around the science and making sure that every dollar that we spend has the highest probability of returns. And that is in an industry where the house wins in 87% of the time. Now, that's not investment, that is gambling. And from that moment on, you ask yourself, well, if we playing against odds that are against us, why would that not occur to us? That's risk management. As a board, and I've been part of a number of boards the last 20 years, I asked the board at a number of times, but as our cash reserves grow, I asked them the irrevocable question, a very uncomfortable question: should we give it back to you all, every single penny of it? And at the moment, we're standing at $230 million. Or should we do something totally different? And the third option, should we continue what we do? And at every of these 6 to 8 board meetings a year, the answer is unequivocally that we should continue what we do. So I'm going to speak to you first on $4.90. $4.90 is the value of the cash in the company, non-diluted, per share, and that doesn't take into account the premium, the pipeline, or the fantasy. You ask you then yourself, well, if that is the bottom of the company, it's not what we trading 2 or 3 times the value of cash. What's wrong? Is it the norm in our industry? Well, cash serves a number of functions, certainly in our industry. It gives you a 3-year runway. And don't forget that in this business, time is the option price on a breakthrough, a scientific breakthrough. You also have the exclusivity and sovereignty, the ability to look your creditors, suppliers, and you in the eye and say, well, we can meet our obligations. It gives us a shock absorption. That means that in the industry where governments come to a standstill, public offices, FDA shut down, turnaround is long. We have the ability to navigate these periods. And fourth, it gives us the privilege to fail. Many people, and certainly my peers, don't like that. But the privilege to fail means that a rejection, an obstacle, is not an existential threat to the company when it carries its resources. The second number that I want to share with you, and on my way to this meeting, I reread what I call the Bible that every investor in life sciences should read. That's a paper by the Massachusetts Institute of Health, 2019, by Wong and Sia. And everyone who touches biotech or medtech ought to read that paper. And I'm going to speak very slowly. It's recorded, so you could read it back in the transcripts, I hope. MIT, over 16 years, analyzed 406,000 clinical trials with 21,000 compounds, and compounds is drug products. Out of those 406,000 trials, only 13.8% met their objectives, and that is from phase 1 to regulatory approval. I really recommend you to have that as bedside literature. These are not favorable odds, as you understand. And we ask a question, are we belonging to that pool of 13.8%, and how do we prolong that? Now, if you take the graveyard of oncology out of it, which has a probability of success of 3.4%, you arrive at 20.9% overall success rate. If you then discount the 80% of companies that bring these products to market, there's a very small pool that actually generate revenues or come to a break-even point. And I've seen it the last 20 years as my principal task to navigate and make sure that we increase the odds of success. The third number I was thinking of to share with you today is 410 million. 410 million is the amount we spent over 20 years to come to this point in time. That's $20 million average spent per year. In our sector, that is ridiculous. To develop drugs to market, to develop a pipeline and increase its chance with a $20 million spent is, in the eyes of US institutions, when I speak to them, almost an impossibility. They often ask us whether we cut corners or whether we've made rounding errors or we have off-balance sheet transactions, but that is the number that we spent over 20 years. If you then translate that to what we do at the moment, that's about $1 million per employee in revenues, or in US dollars, 700,000. The median in the US is between $200,000 and $400,000 revenues per employee. We posted the last financial year 35 million in profit over 55 million in expenses. That means for every dollar that we spent, we get 65 cents in profit. In the industry, that's about half. Another metric that I always look at is, and in managing the company and establishing it, is fixed versus variable cost. And the contribution margin of 60% means that our operating leverage is such that we can switch off the fixed cost when we need it. These financial metrics are not a hazard. It's not a coincidence that we started off by putting that in our visor and said, this is what we want to achieve. in order to belong and remain to the very small pool of companies in the world that navigate on profitability. And that's a challenge. It's a business model that is somewhat exotic in biotech. If I speak to blue chip institutions in the US as part of a non-deal roadshows, they say, well, CLINUVEL is a black swan. We don't see profitable companies. But to fund your R&D from your profits is almost an impossibility in the eyes of US investors. It's not something that we glow or boast about, but the reality is we chose this business model in order to be able to self-fund our R&D. And we are exactly at that point. So we talked about $410 million. Now, what is the future? And what are the inflection points? And I think that comes to your point. Well, we are at the stage where we have the emergence of SCENESSE, advancing it in vitiligo, arguably the biggest market. We're doing something totally novel. We're repigmenting patients that have lost their color. We're advancing ACTH. You will see the filing update in 2026. So we're entering a generic market. Often the question is, well, if you got a branded product, why are you entering generics? And the answer is because we diversify. We lower the risk. But then there is the pipeline, the research. And unfiltered, uncensored, without bias, I will share you, and that goes on record, how that goes. You open labs, you build your own teams. And for 9 years, we were in despair because the results were not the way we wanted to go. And we expected much more from the teams in Singapore. And there were many times where the CSO, Dr. Dennis Wright, and I said, well, you know, let's call it a day. It's it. The first glimpse of hope came in November 2024, but the breakthrough came in January 2025. Because producing data is one thing, but the art and the skill in our field is to produce reproducible data or repetitive data that can be, and that's a big word, validated. And we had a vision, also a big word, an idea, an ambition. By being a specialized company on peptides, proteins, hormones, and understanding exactly the biometrics that we needed for these to be successful, and for one is bioavailability or therapeutic window, which is an expensive word, is dosing at the right concentration such that you don't provoke intolerability or comorbidity. You need to keep patients safe, and you want the drug to be effective. Now, in peptides, the therapeutic window is very small. If you then have a half-life of minutes and a low bioavailability, then you've got 3 challenges to meet in R&D. And many, many years, we knew that it could be done, but if the teams can't deliver it, you come to a point where you want to throw the towel in. But a year ago, we started to see results after repetitive attempts and efforts. And that led to not only hope, but somehow the conviction that the idea, the concept that we had 10 years ago could actually be realized. And what happens gradually, and you probably don't see that in annual reports, or you don't fully realize it when you look at a company that specialized in hormones now shifts to being an expert in drug delivery. Now that is a whole new business. And what you've seen a couple of weeks ago is that we had the audacity or the courage to announce that we are going to put the next generation of drug delivery, and our aim is controlled release. Controlled release means injecting a drug that has a release curve over weeks or months. That is quite important because it means that the patient doesn't need to seek the doctor's attendance on a daily basis. That has an enormous advantage, as you've seen with the implant that we deployed over 2 decades. So suddenly, the ambition came through, as I think Professor Rosenfeld said, not by sheer persistence, but by putting the right people together. We had a number of teams in Singapore, and we invested considerable money in Singapore, but we knew that we wanted to have one specific talent. And I share you the anecdote how this goes in drug development. And that specific talent was contacted in 2018. But he was comfortable in his pharmaceutical job and was not looking for a new employment. But we knew that this man was one of the very few on the planet that could actually formulate the way we wanted it. It took 3 years to talk to him and convince him to join the ranks. That is persistence. It's keeping in contact with the people you've identified on the planet and understanding that they make the difference. Now, attracting is one, but the retention is second. He formed a team around him, and that's the team that is at the moment delivering and realizing our ambition. That is how it goes. And that is the value of time in research in pharmaceuticals. What does the future look like? What are the catalyst or the points that you look at? A house with a branded and a generic product. A house that now is developing its own release formulations. And what we did, we answered to the demand from the market. Every investment banker over the last 20 years had asked us, but could you deliver this peptide transdermally through the skin? Well, I've told you last year, and that was also on record, all the big cosmetic conglomerates on the planet had filed patents on melanocortins as early as the 90s, at the turn of the century, but all of them walked away because it was so complex. But there was another reason, there were 2 reasons actually. The business of a cosmetic company, like the big French ones and the American ones, is not to pigment patients, because pigmentation brings out freckles, it brings out sunspots. Their business is to bring the next generation of products every season in order to beautify the skin. Then there was the risk, the perceived risk of melanoma. Oh my word, if you induce melanocytes, could it be masking or inducing melanomas? These were enough reasons for the cosmetic companies to walk away from melanocortins. Now, our onus, our work, was actually to prove over 2 decades that the supply, the administration of melanocortins was not inducing melanomas. On the contrary, it rather has a protective effect. The longevity, the time value in pharma is actually pursuing that mission in order to show the medical and dermatology community that it's not hazardous or dangerous. Now, if you say that at the beginning of the journey in an investor room, no one would invest. You would chase all the investors out of the room. So silently we worked to prove and disprove the notion that the activation of melanocytes, pigment-producing cells, would be dangerous. I can say hand on heart today, after 2 decades, that we have proved that. When safety is therefore no longer in contention, you proceed and realize the ambition that the investment community wanted, that is to get these melanocortins to the skin in order to induce, activate, assist self-bronzing. And that is what we believe the holy grail in cosmetics. But the black swan doesn't stop there, because now we are a pharmaceutical company adding a cosmetic component to the business, which is wholly alien. There is no competitor in the world that translates its technology from pharmaceutical to cosmetic. For that to be successful, you need one word: visibility. And where do you start? Well, you start where the prescribers are and those that profess to be the experts, and that's the North American dermatology community. 20,000, of which 8,000 have practices or multi-physicians practices in the United States. So in a staged approach, we understood that for our franchise to be successful, we need visibility and we need an outreach to those that actually going to dispel and disseminate the notion of melanocortins. And we're in the middle of that. Our presence at the American Academy of Dermatology in 2025 was the first, and 26 will do the same. The other part that I need to stress is innovation, performing novelty, or in patent terms, finding the inventive step, is not only on the level of technology. Your entire approach has to be novel. The way you communicate, the way you market, the way you package, the way you distribute. It is a red line that has to go through the company, because putting a novel product on the table is not sufficient. To give you an example, with the liquid formulation that we are developing, was the need, since it didn't exist to our liking or to our needs, to develop a device. So we have an in-house engineering team that is developing devices. If we believe that we're innovative in vitiligo, it also means that we seek avenues to use AI in order to optimize the process. So innovation is multifaceted. It is not just the science of the technology. It needs to be, call it a culture in the company, not to be afraid to do something novel. So a branded, a generic product, a formulation, delivery platform, and photocosmetics. In terms of business, I downplay, and I do that consciously, the importance of cosmetics to the pharma business. For me, it was always, and I say that on a personal basis, it was a nice to have. It is answering the market wants. But what I've learned in this industry, and in this industry is cosmetics, is that the products can be very efficacious. But what matters is really the marketing, the branding, the distribution. That is 99% of the success. And that is how I see this venture progressing. Is it at the same pace that you wish to see? Probably not. But what it does, it cuts the risks in bite sizes. So this year, this calendar year, we had a number of publications in the Financial Times in the fashion and cosmetic section. We had the Vogue, we had the Wired, Condé Nast, one of the largest publishing houses in the world. And we now see that there is a demand created. where Tetler, Cosmopolitan come to us and say, what are you developing in-house? Can we write an article about it? In my view, that is the beginning of visibility. But don't forget, a pharmaceutical house developing cosmetics is something like a misnomer that doesn't exist. So that's novelty again. And that's going to take time. But what I've learned in life, my professional life, in my personal life, is that if you've got an ambitious task or journey, you map it out and you do it step by step. And the requisite to succeed is not technology, it's people. If you've got the right team to make the ascent, in my view, we're not bad. Then there's the question about share price. I hear more about share price here in Australia than elsewhere. I don't know if there's a disconnect between the value, the intrinsic value and share price. I talked about it at length last year. What I do know is that a number of factors don't aid, don't assist. But if you take a much wider view, in general, in innovative biotech, you see that these companies, certainly single platform companies, go through an enormous appreciation when it leads up to an inflection point like an FDA approval or an EMA approval. But as soon as the balloon goes up, it also goes down after. But earnings, revenues, generally, and I can't say that for all, but for most of the analysis, do not bring as much fantasy as the hope of a market that you can't yet model. Because once the model of the analyst is written, the reality kicks in. We have seen that in this company, because at 2 occasions when we had any or hardly any assets, where we hardly had any cash or revenues, the company ballooned up to $2.5 billion. So I'm coming to the end of this dialogue with you. This is the 20th year. It's been very good. It's been beyond my expectation with the Mill and the Court in that already existed 25 years. But this team will continue because the science and the willingness or the eagerness to bring this forward is not abating. But if you hold the thought that controlled release holds a promise in pharmaceuticals and medicine, not because I say so, but because it's published and many of the large pharmaceutical companies write about the need to have one, then let your fantasy run riot and understand what kind of peptides and proteins and drugs you can put in a controlled release formulation. So I'm very privileged to see the beginning of that kind of work that took 10 years of funding actually to see it progress. And I can assure you that at every Christmas, I wanted to abandon the project, and I'm glad I didn't. So on this note, I leave you, and I'm sure you've got some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philippe. Well, first, we will now come to the general questions. First, we will start with questions received prior to the meeting. We call on the Head of Investor Relations, Malcolm Bull, to read these out, and then Malcolm will direct the question to the appropriate person for these. Thank you, Malcolm.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Morning, everybody. There's a number of questions we have received, as Jeffrey mentioned, and I've grouped them into several categories, and we'll go through them. Some of the questions may have been already answered, or partly answered so directors can add or ask me to move on. First one is capital management, a frequent question focusing on the share buyback, various questions such as, is the buyback still in play? Why have you not executed that to a significant extent? And can it, if it's not in play, can it be restarted? So I think we'll ask Matthew Pringle to address that particular issue. Oh, yep. Yeah. Oh.
Thanks very much. Well, the share buyback expired last year and was automatically renewed for a further term. And its first tranche, for reasons probably before my time, wasn't fully absorbed. And in the second term, we had some large blackout periods and also some periods where the board made a conscious decision not to enact because of information we had, so we didn't act on market. So the buyback actually lapsed automatically through lack of use. Now the mechanism we've got for a buyback too is that we just can't go on the market and buy $1 million worth of shares. Our capacity to buy and our timing is very restricted under the rules. We also felt that the impact that would have on the share price would be negligible because of those restrictions and the very low volumes we could actually enact at any point in time. And so we decided that a better course of action was to preserve the cash rather than use it through that buyback mechanism. It just wasn't an effective mechanism to really have an impact on share price or to benefit shareholders in our view.
Okay, thank you. On the clinical pipeline and translation to commercial revenue streams, Philippe, this is for you. And I'll read it a little bit verbatim from the shareholder. Given CLINUVEL is narrowing its clinical development focus to vitiligo, ACTH-related disorders and porphyrias, what are the key milestones or regulatory/reimbursement hurdles you anticipate in the next 12 to 24 months? And how will these milestones translate into materially diversified revenue streams beyond our existing business of SCENESSE for EPP?
Or ACTH? Is a question to it?
Well, it's on how we will develop vitiligo, ACTH and porphyrias into commercial revenues section. And the milestones along the path, absolutely.
Well, let's start one by one. So vitiligo is advancing its trial. We completed the trial. The last patient, last visit was last month. There's a 6-month follow-up. Then there is 6 months of analyses. So that's going to be somewhere in the second half of 26. We anticipate there are 2 agencies in the world. There's EMA and FDA. We slightly changed our tech because it's a very dynamic environment. From the interaction we've had with EMA, like in EPP, we believe that it's good to go to Europe first and US second. We will have 2 interactions, one with European Medicines Agency and one with the Food and Drug Administration. Shortly after that, we will start a 107 study. It's going to be quite a similar design as the 105. That takes you another year out, plus analyses. Yeah, and then it's to be seen whether the results stand up. I mean, we're all assuming that the results are good, but if the results are good as we've seen in the case report, then that leads to the submission. ACTH is a bit closer because we've completed the manufacturing. The drug master file is going to be incorporated in the submission. The submission is going to take place in the first country in 2026. Yeah, and then it's about the regulatory turnaround. I don't know what it is at the moment. At the moment, everything certainly in the US is delayed because of the government shutdown. So I can't give you definitive timelines, but the first is the submission in 26, the regulatory interactions, and then the start of 107.
Okay. You may wish to stay there, Philippe, because we're going to move on to photocosmetics. And this is an interesting one because the shareholder is saying, is it possible the melanogenesis photocosmetic product may be used in the future by a vitiligo patient when near total repigmentation is achieved through the vitiligo program treatment as an additional supplement on the face, as an example?
It's a smart question. Smart question.
It is.
Melanogenesis is an expensive word for the natural tanning process. And what you do in vitiligo, what you try to do systemically with an injection, is to bring back the pigmentation. That is medical tanning. So a transdermal that assists these patients is of course of value. That was the idea. Because if you give vitiligo patients an additional transdermal, it gives credibility and trust to the consumer because you used it from medicine to consumerism. So the answer is yes.
Okay. On vitiligo, particular question on the vitiligo expert panel. Is it still active? And what is their assessment of CUV105?
Yeah, there are two panels. There's an expert panel, there's a scientific panel.
Right.
They have two functions. An expert panel looks at the merit of a drug or new drug in a new disease. These are academics. They are head of a department. You form them around the table, and once and twice a year they convene and they issue an opinion. And the scientific expert panel in vitiligo has a different function. They have a say in the design of the protocols. And that's important because as a company, you want to rely on the medical community to have an input in the design of these protocols. And that has value when you go to a regulatory agency, because every disease, whether it's cardiovascular or neurology or disease in neurology or vitiligo, there's a finite pool of experts in the world. And these experts are either called as a witness by the regulatory authorities to provide an opinion, or if they are on the side of the sponsor of the company, you take them along and you make your case. And so, yeah, that's still active, yeah.
Okay. You can take a break, Philippe, because the next few questions are to other directors. This shareholder is asking, and I think this is for you, Jeffrey, to clarify Philippe's actual intentions and time frame for departure.
I did address this in my own address to shareholders, but Dr. Walgan's employment agreement does expire 30th of June 26, as has been said. The board is overseeing his succession and will provide an update in 2026.
Last question relates to directors' ownership of CUV shares. And Sue, will get you to answer this. So it's talking about the convictions of the directors to CUV, and we've heard statements from two directors seeking re-election where I think there's a lot of passion and commitment to the company. But they're saying, why has the chair only over 3,000 shares, and why do none of the three newly appointed directors hold no shares?
Well, the investment in the company, of course, is up to personal judgment and of people's own financial stewardship. I think regardless of ownership of shares by the directors, it has nothing to do with their commitment and loyalty, and the very hard work that they give for the success of the company, regardless of any share ownership.
Quite right. We have a very professional board who are committed regardless of share ownership. That concludes, Mr. Chair, the questions that have been pre-submitted.
Thank you, Malcolm. So we open the floor to questions from you, the shareholders. Who would like to ask a question? Yes. Could you, again, I remind you to state your name, your shareholding.
Samantha Taylor, can you hear me? 15,000 shares. My
you.
question is in regard to AI, and there's been a lot of change over the last couple of years, and especially the last year. And how is that impacting on your ability to speed up the research process?
Well, you're reading.
Speed up your analysis.
Yep. You're reading our minds as a board, because we discussed this at length yesterday, and I'm going to pass to Philippe to speak about AI in CLINUVEL's operations.
But just before you answer, so not only speeding up the research process and the analysis, but also how you're going to implement AI for that process going forward. And I understand that's challenging, but I'm really interested in your response.
Okay, thanks for that.
It's really I'm burning to tell you, but I can't. The last 3 years I've been thinking, how can we implement AI in our business? In pharmaceuticals, the first talk was, can you do faster screening on molecules and peptides to speed up drug discovery? That's the very beginning. I didn't think the value would be there. Without giving everything away, because there is IP pending, but we are using AI in vitiligo, and that is enormously exciting because I see the results of the project. My estimate is that we will be the first company active in vitiligo that is presenting this to a regulatory agency, and that's all I can say. But it's not so much speeding up, but it's an assisting tool that adds value.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of machine learning, can you just give a bit more about what kind of AI you're using and in which part of the process, just to give us a bit more insight?
No, we hired 2 engineers that are programming and writing the annotations, but I can't tell you. I want to tell you, but I can't. Yeah.
It's in development. So, any other questions? Yes.
Thank you, Gavin Scott, 3,500 shares, recent shareholder. First, I've got 2 questions. First one really is around the capital allocation, and thank you, Professor Rosenfeld, for going on and explaining some of the capital allocation decisions. I understand we've now got $4.90 or thereabouts of cash in the company. My question really, the first question is how much is enough? I understand we need a buffer in order to be able to progress our clinical development. As that figure keeps creeping higher, at what point do we say that this money is no longer required? I also understand the buyback is difficult. Has the board considered an off-market buyback or another form of returning excess capital to shareholders? That's the first question.
Right. I might direct that to Philippe, the first part of your question, if I may.
I had a number of meetings this week in Melbourne, one with a larger investment bank and their analysts, and the ECM, the equity capital markets head said to me something that I've learned. He said, there is no such as sufficient cash in the biotech. And that resonates with me. You will see from us projections over 3 years in the new year, like we've done in 2021 to 2025, and we came under. Our estimate for the operational expenditures and capital expenditures, we just have enough, taking into account delays, objections, rejections that may or may not come in the future. We're getting to a point where we just have enough to execute all the plans. the share buyback is really a contentious issue. The first principle to start off with, and I appreciate as a recent shareholder that you started, you're probably not privy to all the discussion we had in this room or elsewhere, but an R&D company in our life science, in life sciences that does share buybacks is not staying really within their remit, because the research money should be, or the money should be replowed in research. So as a matter of principle, redistributing wealth at this stage is a bit bizarre. But we're doing that now for 7 years, I think, Malcolm, in the forms of modest dividend. This is not a lazy balance sheet. This is actively managed because we know what we want to achieve. And it gives you a runway that may be extended or out of your control, factors that may affect the funding requirements. Now, if you start buying back shares, a company of this size at this stage, there are really two assumptions that you make. The first assumption is that the company would have access to capital in the future. Well, there's no guarantee for that at all. If you look at the graveyard in the US in biotech at the moment, the funding is scarce. The second assumption on doing a share buyback is that it will materially affect the share price. Well, Matt talked about this. Sometimes we have prior knowledge on who the sellers are or those that actually wish to exit. Then it is a zero net exercise, because you know that those who are expressed to exit are using the share buyback, or the moments that you can trade, and it's about 20% per day that you can trade, are going to use that actually to exit. So you constrict your share capital. You therefore affect your liquidity adversely. But if we use our millions and you don't see a significant rise in share price, then why are you doing it? It's also a bad sign for two reasons. And I'm very sensitive to that because I'm at the coal face of this company. When you talk to insurers, and they are not stupid, they made a business in tracking pharmaceuticals and their products. And I remember sitting in Switzerland where the counterside, the Swiss insurers, had the annual report, the cash flow statement, the P&L in front of them. And they knew exactly how much profit we're making. The moment you start issuing dividends and buying back shares, these insurers are going to lower the price. You're going to get the price pressure. So it's in this industry, unless you're Pfizer or Glaxo, that's a different matter altogether. But when you are at this end of the curve, I think a share buyback sign sends a very bad signal to those that actually matter, and that's the payors. So the totality is no, but it's not an absolute no, because if the share price would drift to $2, $4, yeah, you'd be mad not to do it because you need to understand your intrinsic value. But no, at the moment, yes.
All right. Thanks very much, Philippe. Any other questions from the floor? Oh, you had the second one. Sorry, I thought the share buyback was the second one.
Well, the other question is directed at Dr. Walgren. Congratulations on a 20 career building a remarkable company. And from my understanding and research, it's been done fairly unconventionally. You've taken a very different approach to many other people who may have taken on this company 20 years ago. My question is, what advice would you give to the board about the characteristics that the next CEO ought to have in order to guide this company forward?
Well, The only advice I can give is a larger shareholder. I can't have any other capacity. But first of all, these are very kind words, but the word congratulations are never at place because the journey is not finished. So it's been good so far, but success is very frail. It can end the next day. And you've seen that in Enron and Parmalat and Lehman, and it could happen to us. So I don't like celebrating. That's a principle. But we succeeded thus far by default because every other avenue had been tried for 25 years. Because this story started in 1980. So there were only one or two avenues left. But the next girl or boy needs to be passionate and incessantly obsessed by bringing this forward and not see this as a job for 3 or 4 years, which is pretty standard in our industry. And he or she needs to have the capacity to keep the team together because these are the assets. So it's going through the candidates and finding the right person.
Thank you, Philippe. Yes, sir.
Andrew Dixon. Not sure why I need to reveal my shareholding, but a few thousand shares. Philippe, question for you. I
actually direct the question, but
sorry.
let's hear the question.
I asked a question to Philippe, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago. Time has flown by. Whether CLINUVEL had developed afamelanotide as a cream to penetrate the skin. Wasn't able to answer for obviously disclosure reasons. Does it still remain an idea, or are we any closer to revealing some absolute certainty in that?
Okay, so
we'll ask one more after that too.
We'll ask Philippe that question about the penetration of afamelanotide through the skin.
I can't. There has been overnight an article in the Financial Times where I was quoted, but he and I urge you to read it because that gives answer. The assumption was that we would drive afamelanotide through the skin. We never said that. We said we would drive a melanocortin through the skin. Yeah, and that is our research effort. And afamelanotide is a molecule of 1647 Dalton that will never go to the skin. And so our efforts as seeking the grail is to drive a melanocortin to the skin that then assist and activate the melanin, the melanogenesis. Yeah, and that is ongoing, and human testing is on the way, but it's not as simple as you stated. It needs to have a lasting effect. You need to be able to apply it once or twice a day, not 6 times a day, and so forth. So there are a number of kinetic challenges. But it's my life ambition to see that in some shape or form as CEO or shareholder, I don't mind, but it's technically possible.
Okay.
Thank you. And one follow-up.
Yeah.
There's some excitement about the breakthrough in January about the slow release liquid. Just in terms of the business value, well, again, I'm obviously not a biochemist, but in terms of comparing the slow release liquid to an implant, what's the sort of the wow factor which shareholders could potentially be excited about?
Again, I'll hand over to Philippe, but the advantage of the liquid or the gel is the variability in the dosage that you can put in the gel, as opposed to a fixed dose in the implant. Would that be right, Philippe? I've answered the question. Does that answer it for you?
Business value slant to that?
Oh, business value slant. Philippe.
It's a bit sad because it happens at the very end, but my estimate is that this market could actually be bigger than vitiligo. So that's why I'm excited about it.
The flexibility is the key, and what goes in the gel. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
David Warren, I have 15,000 shares. I'm wondering, I think in CLINUVEL's recent history, a lot of times shareholders have been asking when the next revenue stream will come online. I know you're developing three different areas. Do you have any more visibility on when you expect the next, or which of the three areas you expect to produce revenue, and your best estimate of when that might be?
Again, I might hand over to Philippe for that. Again, a question of timelines and which announcements will come first. I would preface it by saying that whatever we do, it takes time, it takes patience, and sometimes the timelines stretch, and that's what happens in biopharma. But to give you more clarity on that, I'll hand over to Philippe.
The regulatory timelines are not in our control. And so to deviate a little bit, the expansion of the label took 1.5 years. Now, if we would sit in this room and we would analyze what you needed to do to expand the label, it's very little work. On the basis of logic, you could do that in one afternoon, but it took 19 months. Yeah, these factors are not in my control or our control, but what I do know is you need have sufficient cash to navigate through it. My estimate where I am today, but don't hold me to it, but I would believe that the ACTH would be the first revenue stream as a generic. That is, if the regulatory turnaround is fast enough.
All right. Thank you, Philippe. Any other questions? I think we've given everyone a good go. So I'd like to conclude the Q&A, and we will announce the results later today on the ASX market announcements platform. This concludes the meeting. I thank all those in attendance and wish you all good health and fortune. Thank you.